Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining our webinar, Strategic Return to Work, a Travel, Technology, and Economic Update. My name is Stephanie Mack. I'm the Marketing and Digital Content Manager here at LodgeLink. Just wanted to cover a few housekeeping items before we get started. We've muted everybody's mics, but if you have any issues, please use the chat window and one of our team will be able to assist you. We invite you to ask questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A functionality, and we'll get to them at the end of the session. And we'll also be recording today's session and we'll send it out to you with the presentation so that you can refer to it later. And with that, I will hand it over to Vinny.
Great, thank you, Stephanie. It's terrific to be here. Strategic Return to Work, it's part of our webinar series here at LodgeLink. And let me take you through a brief agenda of how it's gonna go today. We'll do some quick welcome and introductions. I'll provide a brief background on LodgeLink for the category. We're presenting today three terrific discussion areas: the travel industry at large, the economy, and technology innovations. We feel that these three areas are really important for our strategic perspective in returning to work. And then we're going to shift into an open panel summary of questions, and then of course hear from our attendees that are on the phone. So let's get right into it and meet our distinguished panel of guests. On behalf of the entire LodgeLink team, I do want to thank our three panelists today for your participation and bringing your expertise to help our customers and people who are attending this webinar for the first time during a really turbulent set of events in the travel industry. But our first panelist is Dr. Hugh Dunleavy. He's the founder of Dunleavy Consulting. He's been in this business for a long time, and we value his opinion. 25 years in the airline industry, and he has a global experience that he's bringing to this webinar. He's held senior positions, as you can see here on the screen, in many, many air companies. But probably the best vignette I can give is that he has a PhD in theoretical physics. So if we have time during today, I would hope someone offers a question about that area of expertise with Dr. Hugh. So welcome, Dr. Hugh. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Our next panelist is Mike Holden. He's the Vice President, Policy and Chief Economist for the Business Council of Alberta. He's got more than 20 years as an economist and public policy analyst. His expertise is in demand today, as you can imagine, on viewing the travel industry and the economy and some of the headwinds that we've been facing. We're going to hear from Mike today across those areas and disciplines. And while the numbers are really disappointing and distressing, Mike's going to give his perspective across a couple of areas within travel and what he sees in the marketplace today. So Mike, welcome to the panel.
Thank you.
Our last panelist is Craig Elias. He is the entrepreneur in residence at Bow Valley College. He's a creator, entrepreneur, and best-selling author. He's been picked up by Forbes. He's also, his company has won $1 million prize in what was called the Global $1 Billion Idea. It was a competition. He's been twice named the Dow Jones as one of the 50 most promising companies in North America. But what you probably don't know about Craig is he's got 14 million Twitter followers. And I was very pleased that he invited me on LinkedIn to join his network. So Craig, welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for having me.
Terrific. Again, on behalf of the company, we want to thank all of you for carving out the time, including our attendees on the phone. So let me give you a little perspective about LodgeLink. Many of you know that I joined as Chief Commercial Officer. I'm thrilled to be here, but I was actually working as a consultant back in March. And what was interesting about this time frame was right before St. Patrick's Day here, I had a conversation with our CEO, Trevor Haynes, who's a terrific leader, a man of great integrity. And he actually reached out to me and said, Vinny, I'm gonna make a decision to send our employees virtual. So instead of me flying back up to Alberta, I basically started the virtual journey, as many people in the travel category did. And then 10 weeks later, I took on the role of Chief Commercial Officer, and it's been terrific. And a little bit about the company is we never closed during COVID at the height. We had some dips in volumes, and it was amazing to see a team of 40 people, how they serviced our customers. We kept hotel properties open. We shifted into a defensive mode to help those hotel properties service workforce management crews. We put safety and security as a top priority, and we would continue trading for the next 10 weeks until I joined in June. We have hotels and lodging properties, over 150,000 rooms and 1,500 properties. We serve diverse communities and industries across North America. We have a customer base of about 1,000 customers and growing. And we also have within our ecosystem the opportunity to book transportation, whether it's air or car. And what I'm really thrilled about is the will to win and high skill of the team, especially in commercial. So we hope that you will reach out to us to learn how to save more and some of the instrumental and technology advances we're making in the category of workforce travel. Steph, we can go to the next page. Thank you. Now, a little bit about the background of the webinars. When I first came on board as a consultant, COVID hit and we wanted to get our message out there for the industry. And we developed these webinars to educate our customers about not just COVID-19, but reaching out proactively to our buying community to help them in this shifting paradigm of what do I do about my crew? Is this property in fact open? And our hotel partners on the supplier side have been absolutely terrific to deal with. And what we wanted to do was continue that dialogue. We've had supplier conferences, we've had customer and buyers join us, we've had franchisees go through these webinars, and they've been quite successful in keeping the dialogue open during these times. Again, LodgeLink did not close down during COVID. So a few things on this slide that I wanted to point out. It was incredibly valuable to our suppliers and to our customers to share those business insights and what we've been seeing in the marketplace so they can do a better job and save money, but also drive efficiency during this time. They still had to move crews. And we, in the middle of that, we expanded our coverage. So the last piece is really the rules of engagement, as you'll hear from Dr. Hugh and Craig and Mike. Everything has changed as a result. So duty of care now becomes a little bit more front and center on how you're going to do this. And quite frankly, it's going to be challenging with the industry going through so much change, rules of engagement, and enforcement. So with that, I'd like to get started across the three areas that we have. And I'm going to give you a couple of snapshots to help set the table. None of this should surprise anyone on the phone or on the webinar. These three KPIs have been out in the marketplace since March. If you look at the travel space, the TSA administration, they're down 96%. You can combine that a little bit more with headwinds just recently in the tri-state of the US, where they prohibited travel now from certain Southwest states as of last night. So we will see a little bit of an impact right there just in terms of point to point in the US. The same could be said for me to go from New York to Calgary to headquarters. The quarantine is back in many of these states for 14 days. 86% is the drop if you take it a year previously, May 31st, on the size of the traveler population. It's a massive decrease. And then from an economic standpoint, which I followed quite closely where the trends are going, where we're seeing some softening or warming, it's $215 billion just for the US economy alone due to the travel impact of COVID-19. Okay, on to hearing from our panelists. So what I'd like to do is, this is gonna work. We're gonna ask the question, we're gonna call on some panelists, and you'll hear their impressions about these questions that we have for them. So first, what lasting impacts will COVID-19 have on the travel industry in North America? And I'd like to position this to Dr. Hugh first because of your background and extensive experience here. So Dr. Hugh, over to you.
Well, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to talk relatively quickly because I know we've got a lot to get through. So in terms of my perspective, in the aviation industry as a whole, we have to remember that we're extremely sensitive to external influences, whether it's a hurricane, a dust cloud, volcanic ash, or in this case, a pandemic. And the challenge with the pandemic is that the impact of the pandemic takes 3 or 4 weeks to observe from the point that someone gets infected. So we still have limited testing and tracing capacities in many countries. Even here in North America, that's still very limited compared to other countries. We have a high degree of transmissibility, and that is a real problem for us because the virus can spread so quickly. It only takes one state or one province to relax its rules and regulations too quickly, and suddenly you have another spike. Here in the United States, where I'm based, we basically have not had a flattening of the curve. We just had an extension of a severe crisis, and now we've got New York, limiting access to the 3 states surrounding New York, simply because the virus has grown so quickly in California, Texas, and Florida. So we've got a high issue there. I don't believe the severity of the problem has still been fully realized because of the nature of pandemics being nonlinear functions. They have exponential growth if you're not very careful and don't act quickly. The other challenge we face in the aviation sector is that, unfortunately, we're only as smart as our dumbest competitor. And what I mean by that is if you've got an airline operating in one part of the world where they've got restricted capabilities and they don't do proper testing or they don't do proper screening of passengers, and they then come into your country of operation, then they bring that virus back with them. So the risk of reinfection is significant, even for those regions which have got the virus under control. The other things that we'll see changing is that the duty of care will become far more important as consumers make decisions to travel. And when consumers make decisions, the behavioral aspects of how they make decisions are not simply based on just the economics. Now the risk of their health will come into play in terms of making decision. Previously, it was all about the price. Now it'll be these other non-quantifiable factors in terms of how safe they will feel going through the airport experience, going through security and immigration, and then what will it be like on board, particularly for long-haul flights, if that's the area of concern.
Right.
The issue, I'll stop there if that's appropriate, but I certainly have a lot more to say, but I don't want to log down too much time at this stage, but plan to have a significant change. And the other aspect will be, just because you as a company have been successful prior to the pandemic, we need to make sure that the team that you've got in place are aware of the variations that are going to take place so that the post-pandemic environment, that you're well prepared with the right team to take advantage of that situation if you can recover and get back into operation quicker than anyone else. And as you already said, you've been fortunate enough in not having to close down operations like so many other companies have.
Very well said. Thank you, Dr. Hugh. Obviously, point to point in Europe in the summer is critical for their revenue stream, and different rules of engagement are going to impact that area as well as North America too. Craig, I want to hear you weigh in on this first question as well.
So I think you're going to find a lot of older people staying home, and when stuff does come back, I think it will be the younger people that then travel more. I think there's going to be a big piece in this. I'm thinking about something called a regret minimization framework, and that people are going to look at what they have to do, and they're going to try to find a way to say, what's the lowest risk way of being able to accomplish what I need to get done? I saw some interesting statistics about flying versus traveling, and that people feel safer in their cars. Yeah. This was a tip survey, MMGY. Most people said 68% say they feel more comfortable in their cars than anywhere else. Parks, 40%. Grocery stores, 29%. So I think that's also going to, the mode of travel, I think, will change a lot as well.
Okay. Let's move on to the next question real quickly here. What do you think the leisure, corporate, and crew travel segments look like 1 year from now? Craig, why don't we start with you, and then I'll flip around here to get some different perspectives.
I think it's all going to come down to perception of safety.
Yes.
Okay.
How safe it is for me to get on a plane versus get in a car. Like the story I was telling you earlier, I've got a 9-year-old father-in-law who's going to be at the cottage, and maybe his last summer there, so we're going. I could fly for free. I have so many points. It would cost me nothing to fly. We're going to drive for 3 days just because our perception is it's then a whole lot safer. I think for people that do travel, I think you're going to find a lot more people are going to focus on how do they get a deal out of this. So there's going to be a lot of discounting, I think, in the process to encourage people to travel. I think most people would agree that if travel comes back, leisure travel is going to come back before corporate travel.
I tend to agree with the leisure piece. I'm sure Dr. Hugh, you would as well. However, you know, with the recent quarantine by the tri-state area in the U.S., crimps sort of that vacation, because it's Florida's in there, Texas, Arizona. You have a lot of point-to-point people trying to find a vacation spot. So now you're forced to drive to a degree. But Dr. Hugh, any final thoughts on this area?
I think the point Craig made is that historically, the corporate travel made decisions very close to departure, simply because they were able to do that and they required the flexibility on the ticketing. And leisure travel made decisions far sooner, so they get advantage of those deep discounts. That's not going to be possible now, because you cannot make a decision today and hope that in 3 months' time I'll be able to travel, everything will be fine, because between now and then, that destination may have imposed some sort of restriction or quarantine, and then your plans go up in the air again. So I think it's going to be a highly volatile situation with a high degree of uncertainty. And that goes hand in hand with what Craig was saying. Right. I don't want to make a decision to purchase a ticket, which is a highly disposable item, right, when I've already got a car in place. Yes, it'll take me a little bit longer, but I know I can get up and go if things work out for me and there are no rules and changes. Making the decision to buy a ticket, I think, will be, right, it'll be so volatile that I think it will be very difficult for airlines to even forecast what future demand will look like to set prices in the market, even though I will tell you they'll be at severe discount. I was speaking with a few major airlines in Europe last week, and they were estimating that they doubt if they'll be back to 30 to 40% of operations by the middle of next year. So that's, well,
let me close out. Yeah, let me close out this section with a thought. I have my global hat on from my prior company days at American Express. And, when you're reliant on corporations to send employees to drive commerce and set deals and so forth, many companies have just said either work from home for the remainder of the year, do video conferencing, et cetera. You can't force the corporate traveler back onto a plane, which is a tough position to be in from a supplier standpoint. Leisure, you can only do so much as well to prompt price and get people on board. And I used to manage those segments from cruise lines to travel industry to leisure. And the corporate piece, I believe, is going to take some time to come back. Let's shift gears now to some
Can I add one thing here, though, Vincent?
Go right ahead, Craig.
I think there's one really important piece. I think cancellation policies are going to drive behavior.
Yes. Yeah.
They will drive behavior, and I believe the industry has spent the last 3 months managing through a litany of cancellations and through, what they've had. 300 days out is a good example, right? What those cancellations look like. We're pretty mature in that space now. So let's go to the next section, which is very important in terms of the economy. Again, just to set the stage, if we can go to the next slide. I wanted to provide a snapshot in terms of Canada and the US. 2 items here. The drop in GDP between both regions is pretty close, 7.2% through March for Canada and 5% in the US through the first quarter of 2020. The impact is far greater in the US in terms of unemployment. This morning, the jobs numbers came in at 1.45 or 1.458 million. Versus 1.3, which was forecasted. So we're still seeing those spikes, and in totality, it's over 20 million people, right, since February. And the same in employment in Canada is a far lower impact. So this is the headwinds that we have to face. And let's get into our first question. What lasting impacts will COVID-19 have on the industrial sectors in North America? These are more germane to what we do as our value prop at LodgeLink in construction, energy, utilities. So what I'd like to do is ask Mike to start to weigh in here from an economy standpoint.
Yeah, thank you. So, in terms of the lasting impacts, I think there are 2 separate issues going on here. So first of all, we have the COVID-19 related economic shutdown and the impact that that's having. And here in Canada and in Alberta, we've got the various provinces trying to work towards some sort of return to normalcy and a gradual reopening and then recovery strategies. But it's not just that. We're also dealing with, especially here, in Alberta, looking at the impact of the oil price collapse. So there's these twin issues that are facing these industries. And on the oil side, we've got the COVID shutdown around the world is weakening demand for crude oil, and on top of that, in March we saw this price war between OPEC and Russia, and there's been some recovery on the oil price side because they've agreed to cut supply when that got extended through to the end of July, but we're still seeing huge inventories in oil. We're still seeing global demand relatively weak, and so there's not the outlook for the energy sector for oil prices at least is is not for a massive recovery beyond where we're sitting at this 40%. And so what we're seeing in not just the energy sector, but also in construction and utilities and these other industries, there are a couple things. First of all, these are, for, in most places, as I understand it, they've been billed or considered to be essential services. So we did not see a significant drop in activity in those industries compared to some of the others. So, as economies shut down, most of those shutdowns were in retail and hospitality and tourism, in food services, and there are much of these public facing industries and businesses. And so for some of these, and for our industrial businesses and even our members at the BCA, the immediate impact was not as significant. I mean, it was on the drilling side and energy, but using construction as an example, we've had most construction companies, they've been essential services, they've learned how to adapt to COVID and have been able to maintain a level of activity that was relatively high compared to everybody else. And so, but what I mean by that is that the drop wasn't as significant, is a better way of putting it. But the issue that we see in these industries is that we're going to see a delayed reaction. So we saw like the shutdown of retail, that was very visible to everybody. That was something that was part of our day-to-day lives. And but for construction in particular, they had work that was still on the books that was going on. And so through the first few months of this shutdown and crisis, it's an essential service. They still have construction activity taking place. And so we didn't see a big impact right away. But that's going to change. And so, in Canada in April, building permits were down 40% year over year. And so there's not going to be a lot of new work coming in. And then again, on the energy side, and actually not just the energy side, we had a survey that the Business Council did of our members in some of the larger companies in the province. And about 64% of them said that their capital spending they've either deferred or canceled the capital projects. And so what we see basically is it's going to be a very slow recovery because we've had all of these, reduced demand for construction, capital spending being down. And so the immediate impact wasn't as significant, but it will continue to lag other industries as we sort of move into an economic recovery stage.
That's a good segue, because diversification is going to be important, and cost overruns is going to be an area that we work very hard on to manage from an efficiency standpoint at Lodging. But that's a good segue for the next question. Which industries will be the quickest to recover from the COVID-19 recession? And again, I'm going to point back to you, Mike, if you can give us a perspective.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think the most important thing to note here is that nobody really knows at the end of the day. I mean, this is a new situation for everybody. Any economist who tells you that they know exactly what's going to happen in the next little while is lying to you. Like, there's no way to know. This is uncharted territory for everybody. And so, at a glance, the short answer to your question is, I think a lot of industries that are in technology related fields that are in a good position to adapt to this sort of new normal, new reality. So meeting technologies, e-learning, online platforms, digital entertainment, those kinds of industries, they're going to be doing pretty well. But I think that in general, the kind of recovery we're looking at here is, I was trying to draw a picture of this, which I didn't have time to put up for this presentation. But, if you look at employment or GDP or something, it was steadily growing and then just kind of fell off a cliff. And I think that the kind of recovery that we're looking at is going to be like a spike back up to about halfway through our losses, and then a very, very slow gradual recovery from that point on. Mm-hmm. And it's going to take a long time to get back to where we were before. And the reason for that is, we see, if you look at the customer-facing industries that I talked about before, and even in downtown office towers or work sites, everybody's trying to adjust to a new normal, a new way of doing things. They have to respect physical distancing requirements, capacity restrictions in certain industries, and so there's this adjustment process is going to take a long time. I mean, here in downtown Calgary, some of the businesses that we're talking to, some are not planning on bringing people back into their office until September. I even heard one company just recently, they're not even thinking about it until January. And if I could just point back quickly to one of these other survey results that we had. So we asked businesses who had laid people off, how are they going to be to what extent are you going to be refilling some of these lost positions? And so from that, 18% said that they were not going to be refilling any of their lost positions at all. 31% said that they'd rehire some of them back, and 13% more said that they were going to be having even additional layoffs beyond that.
Sure.
So I think that we're looking at, no industry is going to be quick to recover, is my point. And I think that it's going to be a long, slow grind for everybody.
Well, for someone who follows the market every day, I'm still going to get in on Peloton. I think that's still a buy for me. So if I can get one of those bikes over the next 12 weeks, that would be a good investment, as well as the stock. Let's get to our last economic question for the panel, just to weigh in here with some thoughts. And each of you bring diversification to the panel. What measures can be taken to restart the travel economy or to support the industry? And whoever wants to start first, throw something out here, because whatever we thought was in the playbook is basically been scrapped.
Well, maybe I can start with one thing, and then I won't talk as much this time around and yield the floor. I think that, Craig talked earlier about risk and perception of risk, and I think that is the big issue the big hurdle we need to address. I saw this, there was a study once talking about, assessing the risk levels of certain kinds of activities. This was from the United States. It was on a scale of 1 to 9, where 1 is playing tennis and getting restaurant takeout, and 9 was sports stadiums and music concerts. And on that list, hotels and camping were 3, and planes and air travel was a 5. And I think that what we really need, the most important part of it, is for governments to assure the population that travel is safe to the extent that it actually is. And so it's a bit of a different case, in Alberta and in some other Canadian provinces where, cases have been declining steadily or have bottomed out. And I think that, the same public advice that told us that we needed to shut down, we needed to isolate, has to lead the charge in telling people that it is safe to go out, and also prescribe the conditions under which it is safe to go out. And so I think that is probably the most important first step.
Well said.
So I think a little bit about something, and I forget when it was, but there was this time when the federal government would give you tax rebates if you did home improvement. And I'm wondering if there's a way for governments to do something similar, but for businesses, around implementing technology in their business to make themselves more robust. I think about that as a way to get people to reinvest in themselves and to get ready for what happens afterwards.
Interesting response. Thank you, Craig. Dr. Hugh?
Yeah, couple of comments. I like the comment made about how do we ensure that the people are convinced that the risk of travel is minimized, and that actually the word should be safe to travel. Using the word risk is obviously an off turn for the population. But I think there are a number of things that we have been able to demonstrate that are successful in controlling the spread of the virus. However, people got bored with it, or they just got tired of it and moved away. I think we have to still reinforce the need that masks and personal protective equipment is essential still, and it will be essential for quite some time. Social distancing does work, and if both parties in social distancing have masks on, the risk of spreading the virus drops from almost 70% to less than 1.5%. So we know that works. Masks and social distancing works. We still need to improve testing tools. The ones today are somewhat invasive and they take time. So the speed of response of being able to get the results from a test, and I know I've been in contact with several companies who are working on that. A lot of things have been done on improved disinfecting tools and mechanisms, ionization cabins that can protect you from 3 to 6 hours from infections of these viruses that don't need chemicals, which also can be a potential issue. So that's been working on. I think the other issue is to demonstrate to the consumer that there are going to be multiple levels and points of contact where testing will take place. That may be as simple as taking your temperature, or to actually doing anything else that, such as the ionization process, to ensure that people you're in contact with don't have any virus on their clothes or person. The other issue is that although there's a lot of focus on how quickly we can develop a vaccine, viruses are inherently difficult to generate a vaccine for. Just to look how long some of the viruses we've had, and we've never been able to develop a robust vaccine that doesn't need to be reapplied on a year-over-year basis. And the other challenge, of course, is that even if one country has a virus well under control, its willingness to open its borders to other countries will depend on the performance and track record of that other country. Recently, we had an Emirates flight that flew from Dubai into Hong Kong. 29 people on board had the COVID-19 virus, but the passengers didn't just come from Dubai. They were what we call fifth freedom traffic coming from Pakistan, India, other places, connecting in Dubai, reintroducing the virus to a place that had it under control. That's
Right.
where it's going to be a hard struggle for governments to convince people to travel, because even if your own country has done a great job,
Right.
how convinced are you that your neighboring country or a country a world away hasn't
Right.
done a very poor job?
Well,
So
thank you for that.
reinfection is a big issue.
Yeah,
even
thank you for that. As I look to close this section out now, the steps that corporate is doing to my supplier colleagues on the airline side and in hotels, from a corporate standpoint, they're making strides and announcing the steps that they're taking to keep people safe and the cleanliness protocols, et cetera. On the leisure side, I think there needs to be more consistency there as well.
Yes.
On what they're doing in standards. It's just not a marketing campaign to head down to Jamaica. It's what are you doing to keep those properties the same way that the B2B space is actively pursuing that. Let's switch into our last category for those joining us today. It's the technology innovations. So if we could jump to the next slide, this is going to be very helpful. So technology has enabled us to do so many advantageous things in the space of travel, in the space of LodgeLink, on how we make crew management so much more seamless and efficient. And we've relied on technology to help us. But during this pause, we've been retrenching and figuring out how can technology also accommodate people who need to move in a safe manner. Now you have virtual technologies, you have Zoom, you have so many cloud-based capabilities. But when we think about business trips or remote experiences, how are you going to start to tighten down the approval process and making sure you include the health and safety of your employees as an example? So let's jump into this question here. Aside from video conferencing, what technologies will and should emerge as a result of COVID-19? And I'm going to throw this one over to Craig.
I think for me, the first thing I think of is anything that's direct to consumer. I saw this whole thing happening with the food chain in the United States where farmers had, thousands of tons of food that was going to waste because they had no way to get it to the consumer, because in the past they went through a supply chain and got it to a restaurant. So I think there'll be a lot of direct to consumer things that are going on. But I'm really intrigued, even within the world of food delivery or things of that nature. There are some restaurants I've seen that are getting rid of DoorDash or other places. They're actually offering a discount to the customer because they're trying to make sure that they get to stay alive. They offer a 20% discount, so you end up saving money. They end up getting the tips and all kinds of other stuff. So there's a lot of this direct-to-consumer and bypassing channels, I think, is part of what is going to happen. And I think about things like infrastructure, autonomous vehicles, robotics, distance learning, telehealth, like that. Nobody wants to go to a doctor's office. Nobody really wanted to go in the past because where people were sick. Now you don't want to go because maybe you're going to get COVID from that.
Right. So that's challenging. Does anybody else want to add? Because we have one more question under the technology umbrella, but I'm welcome your thoughts to add.
Well, I agree with Craig's. One small one I'd like to add quickly is I think that, we touched on this earlier, but this whole issue of access to rapid and reliable testing, I think is paramount to all of this success. So, even if you think about getting on a plane, so to the extent that people have concerns about that, if we could imagine a world where you go to the airport an extra hour early and get a test and be, reasonably satisfied and convinced that you plus every single other person on your plane is free from COVID, and that you can get on and travel safely and securely. And I think that to the extent that we can develop those kinds of technologies, they'd have a significant positive impact.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, if I could add, in the work I've been doing with the airlines, I've also been talking to them about this type of a process to basically demonstrate that any passenger that's traveling with you is free from the virus. Sometimes that's not possible because of the time delay we've discussed, but making sure that there's an appropriate disinfecting process that people go through. And that's why I talked about these ionization cabins, which can process 750 people an hour. And you're going to need that level of throughput to able to do that at an airport when travel does come back.
Right.
So I think we'll see more progress in that area. The comment about the supply chain changes and the way you're going to get rid of this intermediation process, I think is very valid. People still want to go out and do things, but they want to know that if they do it, they can be safe in doing so. So I see a lot of things changing in that area. So I think the entire supply chain is another area that will be totally renewed. Here in the United States, there was a decision made that the United States would move to more a service-based economy, and 95% of the medications in the United States are generated and produced in China.
Right.
That will change. So I think that will come back. That doesn't impact the travel, but I think the very fact that the supply chain will change will indicate that other components of that, of how we interact with people, will also change.
Okay, thank you. And Dr. Hugh, I'm going to give you the last word on this question, and then I'll look to close because we got some questions coming in. Once we're able to travel for business, as an example, is the quarantine still necessary? How can technology help? I'm going to throw that one to you, Dr. Hugh.
Thank you. That's a really good question. The issue is, if it depends on the incubation period of the virus itself. So I could become infected, not be showing any symptoms, pass through the temperature checks, and unless I have a check that actually tests for the virus itself, and we can do that very quickly, you will find different countries implementing quarantines. Why? Because the state of technology in each country will be somewhat different. If you talk about the advanced economies in the world, they'll be able to put that technology in place. But a lot of travelers coming from, let's say, second and third world countries will not have that technology available. And even if they did, you will not be able to guarantee that it was applied consistently at all points of contact or at all airports or all cities. So I think you'll find that countries will err on the side of caution and say, if I'm not sure that I can guarantee the quality of testing at the origin site, then they'll still apply that destination. So give you an example, a few years ago, maybe 10 more years ago, Garuda, Indonesian Airlines, was banned from flying to any city in Europe because its safety record on aircraft was so bad. I think that will now defer over to, is the duty of care being applied consistently in all all origin cities that are coming into my country? If they're not, you'll have these differentiated rules and regulations about it. So technology can help if we can provide fast testing and validation. So I think that's where a lot of companies will now be spending their time to verify that the virus exists or doesn't exist, and know that you've got that with a high degree of confidence. Sure. Having a 15 or 20% error rate in false positives or false negatives will not satisfy the safety concerns of the traveler.
Okay. I'm going to check in here on time to keep us right on par for QA. And just some closing thoughts. The diverse experience on the phone showed today between technology, travel, and the economy, and there are significant headwinds. I believe that communicating with our customers, our buyers, as well as prospects on new jobs that they're embarking, whether it's telecommunications, it's construction, it's oil, wind, solar. LodgeLink is basically in the forefront of communicating one-on-one to both property, how to move those folks with the buyers, and making it highly efficient. And we have seen trends with smaller crews, people rotating more frequently. That creates complexity, but we're able to move those folks efficiently and safely. So I put some contact information on here before we get into QA on how to reach LodgeLink. You can reach out to me or to Scott Vinio. And I wanted to thank our panelists as we open up for questions now for your expertise and time today. I thought this was extremely insightful. Despite the strong headwinds, I think collaboration is probably more important now than it ever has been for the category. And there's always light at the end of the tunnel, as they say. So I look forward to getting on the road and getting on a plane myself and going through those protocols as we start to migrate back. I'm going to open up to Stephanie to see what's in the queue for us on the QA side.
Great, thank you very much, Vinny. So if you haven't already, please feel free to pop your questions into the Q&A and we'll address them. So we've got a few now. The first one is, how do you think COVID-19 will impact the development of major pipeline projects in North America, i.e. the Keystone XL, Trans Mountain, etc.?
Well, I'll take a position on that from a LodgeLink perspective, I started to allude that there would be some smaller crews coming into play, more frequent moves. What we're seeing on the supplier side is that we're being asked to quarantine rooms. Basically, if there's a health or safety risk, that we have rooms that we can have a quarantine for the workforce management teams. We're also seeing that our buyers are shifting to purchasing a floor. So I see the projects from a workforce management perspective being more frequent rotations and shortening the length of stay in certain cases, depending upon where you are. It might be very different in a camp environment than it is in a lodging or extended stay property. But what we're seeing is our customers are interacting with us to better understand the trends, the buying patterns, and what we can provide from an efficiency standpoint. So I'm thrilled about that while we're facing this head on. But I'm curious to see from the panel if there's anything else that you wanted to add.
A couple of very quick thoughts. I guess the first is it related to what Vincent was talking about. There's, all of these measures do add costs to the companies that are involved in these projects. And so this is something that we've heard from our members that they're concerned about, because, if they've signed a contract to do a specific amount of work for a specific amount of money, they're suddenly incurring significant additional costs as a result of this, and may have to end up eating their whatever profit margin that they had implemented. But in the broader sense, I don't think that the COVID-19 will actually have a major impact on these investment projects, on the actual development and pursuit of them. I think that there are larger or broader issues at play with regard to the permit approval process and the regulations that businesses are facing, and the public resistance to some of these projects as as they face climate change headwinds and this sort of polarization of views on whether or not we should be pursuing these kinds of projects. And I think that is a much larger obstacle than COVID is.
Sure. Let's take another one.
Sorry, can I add a comment, please? This is Hugh. One of the things that I think we'll find that will be very beneficial for companies like LodgeLink is to have a better and deeper 360-degree view of your customer. The more you know about them and what's of interest to them, and what's sensitive to them, the better you'll be able to set up your communication strategy and your marketing strategy. If something about the travel journey is significant to them and you know that, then your digital marketing strategy can be focused on that more appropriately. It's important to be able to know what is it that are the points of concern of the consumer or the client company, and then make sure that you address those in all of your communication strategies.
Well said. Very well said. Thank you for that, Dr. Hugh.
Great. The next question is regarding the delayed return to work. Employers keeping employees at home, working remotely. What are your thoughts on recent news articles floating a reduced salary for those employees? Is this solely a means to keep costs down?
Well, let's open that up to the panel.
So I've seen those articles, but to be honest, I have not read them in any great detail. So I'm not sure what the basis for that argument is. So a couple of things I could say anyway. One is that, businesses are struggling with costs and reduced revenue expectations in future. And so any measure that they can undertake to keep their costs down, this may be a reflection of that. But in terms of what the basis for that argument is, I mean, an employee working from home does not add costs to your business. So, I mean, my sense is that you've got, so is the implication here that you are implicitly paying for somebody's commuting expenses and, their work clothes or whatever additional costs that they had, that you're now clawing that back? And so I'm not 100% sure. Maybe I'll defer. Maybe some of the other panelists have a better sense of what the foundation of that is.
So my understanding, this is mostly from Facebook, and some of the employees are saying, if I can work from home, I no longer need to live in Silicon Valley, so I can go move to Texas. And the argument that Mark and everybody else is trying to make is, well, if you don't have the expenses of living in the area, then we're not going to pay you as much. But I agree with what Michael says. You're actually going to pay an employee less because you don't have all these office expenses associated with this. So I think my personal perspective is, it's a bit of a ploy to see what they can find a way to get away with, but I don't think they have, they're not going to have higher expenses just because someone works from home, because they work and live downtown in San Francisco. Like on a 2-bedroom apartment in downtown San Francisco depending on where you go, can cost you upwards of $10,000 a month. And if you don't have to pay that rent because you go somewhere else, the employer is trying to say, hey, you don't have those expenses, I'm going to pay you less.
Well, I wish I could, and I've been doing virtual for 10 years, probably 11, and the US had a very low adoption rate in terms of virtual employees. So it came quite as a shock to me during COVID how many people weren't prepared for it. But I find myself working longer hours because I'm not on a plane or working out of a conference room in a hotel. So the company gets a lot out of that. So I do agree with you. It's probably a Facebook precursor for some just other nonsense out there. Let's try to take one more before we conclude because people have submitted some questions. If we have one more.
We do, yes, definitely. So what technology advancements might we see in hotels similar to what airlines are doing?
Wow, that's a good question. What technology advancements at hotels? Well, from what I've seen on the supplier side, there's clearly properties are posting their procedures on how they're handling. Most of the suppliers have an app that their road warriors are integrated into, or people who frequently stay there. I think there should be more outbound communications through those means, through an app, about the location, about any newsworthy items from a duty of care standpoint, not only just for the corporate traveler, but for leisure. And to implement those changes, people need to be able to get ahead by a week or two and send out those communications for people who are traveling on the inbound. That's what I would say that hotels can do a better job at, is communicating to that core base that's coming in 2 weeks and what they need to do to prepare and keep the health and safety of their employees or leisure travelers for that matter. But I'm curious to see what the panel thinks.
Yeah, this is Hugh. Just to comment, I mean, I think it is just as imperative for the hotel industry to physically have disinfecting processes in place for people coming into the building itself. They will expect that the staff go through a similar process themselves, and that the disinfecting processes within the rooms will have been upgraded to match the severity of the problem. But that, for the most part, that is hidden from the consumer, so they don't see that. I think it's important that the consumer feels safe when they go into those locations. And the only way to do that is to demonstrate to them that we've got effective processes in place and tools are being implemented. In the same way that you add security by making security personnel more visible, if you want to demonstrate to people that you're taking the COVID threat seriously, then you would have set expectations that I will want to have every guest coming into this premises go through a disinfecting process, however that may be, probably, hopefully as less intrusive as possible, but as effective as possible. So I think hotels will have to look at that, particularly the larger hotel sites, just to demonstrate that they're taking this event seriously.
Right. And just to close on that, because I'm sensitive to time. I know the big chains have all been very proactive on LinkedIn, talking about their protocols and safety, and they need to continue to do that. They're partners of ours, and they're helping us communicate to buyers. So again, that collaboration is key.
Yes.
In closing, I do want to thank our panelists. I want to thank Mike, Craig, and Dr. Hugh. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance for theoretical physics, Dr. Hugh, but I'm sure I can plan something down the road for us.
There you go.
I want to thank Stephanie for coordinating the webinar today, and all of our guests that are on the webinar, and buyers and attendees. We hope you found this useful. Don't forget about us at LodgeLink. We've been open since March and doing some great things on behalf of our customers. And we look forward to hearing from you. Have a great week. Stay safe, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Stay healthy.